In the beginning, Rusty and I had been talking about this for about 3 years, and the conversation occasionally would come around to the fact, how could we work together? And actually, as the two of us, how could we work together in terms of, playing steel, sitting in with him on projects and so on and so forth. But it really got down to the concept of maybe we could do something even more different, which was put Poco back together for an album. And we actually had called several people, Timmy and Paul. I'm not sure if Paul was contacted, but I know Timmy was, and Timmy wasn't interested. And some more time passed, and finally, one time during a conversation, Rusty asked me, what do you think? And I said, well, I'd be interested provided it was the original members in the group. And at that point, he made some phone calls and I think spoke with Randy and Richie, and both of them expressed an interest in that concept. And it was then that we began to go into phase two, which was, for me, I didn't want to do this unless everybody was really into writing and singing and their chops were up, and they really wanted to make a concerted effort. And so we got together in Santa Barbara at my studio, and we spent 4 days getting to know each other again. It really wasn't about the music at that point, for me anyway. It was about, I hadn't even seen Randy in 20 years, and Richie had become a minister and had a different walk of life, and George I'd seen playing with Vince Gill and Rusty on the road a couple times, so it was like, who are these guys? And it was kind of like going to a high school reunion. And then I realized, no, it's not a high school reunion, it's a family reunion. I was really disappointed that Buffalo Springfield was breaking up, because there was a tremendous amount of talent, a tremendous learning experience in my life. It was the first big group I ever was involved with producing and playing and so on and so forth. So there was a sadness about the fact that it was ending, and Richie and I were in Nashville, I think, finishing up some Buffalo Springfield touring, and at that moment we had talked about what can we do, and I had thrown out the idea of doing instead of a folk rock group, a country rock situation. And from there things started to evolve, where Miles, who was a friend of Rusty's, had been a roadie, I think, for the Buffalo Springfield at one point in time, and suggested when I needed a steel player to bring out Rusty, and in mind that maybe with this concept that we had talked about, that Rusty might be perfect for it. And obviously when Rusty did come out, it began to click, the idea on Kind Woman with the steel, and because we'd used James Burton on dobro for the album before, and that instrument worked, and it worked very well with what I liked and what Richie liked. And then the advent of the steel in the music was even greater, because the steel guitar is so unbelievable. I mean, what it can do, its potential is phenomenal. And it still is phenomenal. As soon as the MIDI stuff gets all hooked up, and Rusty's totally into that stuff, it gives a different twist to things. So the concept of doing a country-oriented or rockabilly-type band was really exciting for me. I grew up on that music.
The Everly Brothers, I think, invented country rock. I mean, I'd like to be able to lay claim to that ground, but I think the Everly Brothers did it, and I think the Buffalo Springfield, like Jimmy was saying, they were certainly country rock, Child's Claim to Fame and Kind Woman and that. Although it wasn't the focus of the Buffalo Springfield, it was a part of, where it was more of the focus for Poco. We had a lot of different guys that we tried in Poco when we started off. There was me and Jimmy and Richie, and we brought in other people just to see what Poco was going to be, even before Randy. And one of them was Graham Parsons. And the notion was that Graham and Richie would be the two lead singers, and they would front the band kind of. And that didn't work out as a concept. But Graham, and we didn't have a record deal at that point, but Graham walked away from that going, hey, this is something that could be good. And he went to McGuinn, who did have a record contract because of the Byrds at CBS, and said, listen, here's what we should be doing. And they pretty much picked up and took what he'd been rehearsing with Poco and took it to McGuinn and said, let's do this. And I think that record beat our record out on the streets because of the fact that he had a record contract, where Jimmy and Richie and I had to go out and earn a record contract.
Poco today has more fans than there have been records sold. And the reason for that is because we never got airplay, but there were people who loved us and came to see us. And now that we're getting the opportunity to be heard, those fans are coming out of the woodwork. They're coming out to actually support it now, which is interesting, because, when I said something about doing a Poco album, people's face would light up, and I'd go, but, they never bought our records. How would they know about Poco? And it really was because we toured.
And when the five of us were on stage at the Troubadour in Hollywood in 1969, I don't think any of us ever dreamed the effect that those five guys would have on American music. And I can say this humbly because it's these two guys that did most of that, But the fact that the Springfield, Poco, Loggins and Messina, and Eagles, that's a big chunk of where American music was.
I have a feeling that there's this place where the music all comes from. And there's these various little taps, and out of this one tap flows people like ourselves and the Eagles. For me, it's a medium in which you can still make warm music. You can write songs and express yourself about life. Country music had a tendency to be about getting drunk and losing your woman and shooting yourself in the head. And I think what I was experiencing when we made that transition was that I love the music, I love where it comes from, but there's another social aspect to this, and it began to happen when I was 19, 20, 21 years of age. And the folk rock thing had a very conscious thing to the lyrics, so it kind of spilled over into that. And then our music became a way of life. It is a way of life with us. And Randy, same way with the Eagles, Take It to the Limit. Their songs about real things going on. And that's, thanks to Woody Guthrie and Tim Hardin and people like that who gave us those roots to play with. We had actually had Richie, myself, and Rusty, and George was there. But we couldn't find that's why Graham Parsons was interviewed, that's why Greg Allman was interviewed, and eventually Randy, which probably Randy should tell this story, came to us and was the final touches that we needed to get somebody to sing above Richie. And George and Randy would share parts at times, and I would do a part here and there, but it was mainly really Randy and Richie.
The high parts. Yeah, I just remember you were rehearsing up at Richie's and auditioning, and I believe Timothy B. Schmidt was there, and I played the bass, and they said, "Get him out of here." No, we played a couple of songs together, and I think pretty much that day we decided that we were going to get together.
Richie was real keen. Richie and Jimmy were real keen on that, making sure that we had a great vocal group. And it turned out that we ended up with all these guys with high voices, which gave us a real sound, that kind of angelic vocal sound, which was really neat. The trademark.
The reason for that song was, again, to probably reflect what Picking Up the Pieces' whole album was about in that period of time. And it basically gives the old audience a chance to say, oh yeah, it's the same guys. But after cut one, it's about who we are today and being able to make a modern record and express ourselves today. So in that sense, it is.
It is really different than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Richie wrote most all the material and was the lead singer. And after what's happened in these 20 years, Randy has become a writer and a singer and has had tremendous success, as his voice is the voice. And Jimmy's had amazing success in his own right. And, I've had some success with Crazy Love in that. And all of a sudden it's evened out now where the guys in the band are all equals. And it's not the way it was 20 years ago. And we come to it, Jimmy and Randy and I and Richie all come to it with a history of successful records and this, that, and the other. And it's a whole different thing now. And it's really fun because we all stand as equals. Even though Randy sold more records and Jimmy sold more records, we don't talk about that.